Well, today's budget update has highlighted the enormous cost that Australians would have to pay for another 3 years of Labor. The enormous cost of another 3 years of Labor. This is another illustration of what we get with a big spending, big taxing, big Australia Labor government. By the end of the next term of Parliament, if Labor was to win the election, we will have seen an additional 2 million immigrants coming into this country without the supporting infrastructure and without the supporting housing that is so desperately needed. What we see in this update is red ink as far as the eye can see. In the headline cash balance, $233 billion of red ink. That's over $23,000 for every Australian household over the next 4 years. The underlying cash balance, similarly, $143 billion. And those numbers in the underlying cash balance, $347 billion worse than when Labor came to power over the forwards. Australians have to foot that bill. This is not free money. It doesn't come from the sky. Australians have to pay that bill. And they pay it either through higher inflation, higher taxes, and or higher interest rates. Right now, in recent times, we've seen around the world that kind of spending, most of all, translates into higher inflation. Every Australian has to pay that price. This is not free money. This is the biggest spending government we have seen outside of wartime or crisis. The biggest spending government outside of wartime or crisis. And there is absolutely no pathway in this update to a restoration of Australians' standard of living. No restoration to Australians' standard of living. Now, all of that is on top of what's already happened in the last 2.5 years. We've seen 7 consecutive quarters of family recession, of household recession, where GDP per capita has gone backwards. We have never seen that before in this country. We haven't seen it before. 7 consecutive quarters of GDP per capita going backwards. We've seen household standard of living, Australian standard of living, collapse. Again, completely unprecedented. We've never seen a collapse like this, and it's the worst of any of our peer countries across the OECD. Australians are paying a price for a government that simply has had the wrong priorities and has consistently made the wrong decisions when we're facing a cost of living crisis and we're facing an economy that has been grinding to a halt. Now, we've just heard from the Treasurer an hour of Orwellian spin. We've heard almost an hour of Orwellian spin from this Treasurer. He has a slogan for everything, but a plan for nothing. And worst of all, the only thing this Treasurer does more than spin is spend. The only thing this Treasurer does more than spin is spend. Australians cannot afford another 3 years of Labor. Happy to take questions.
Mr Taylor, on the spending issue, where do you see the wins to be made there? If,
well,
as you pointed out, Australians pay for it one way or the other. How do you address that? Where are the wins to be made?
Yeah, and can I just pick up on that last point? I mean, what's been so remarkable about recent years all around the world is that we're paying for it much more immediately than we might have in the past because it drives inflation. It drives higher interest rates. It drives a lower standard of living. And that's why spending restraint is so important. And it's restraint in the growth of spending. It's not austerity, but it is restraint in the growth of spending that matters so much. And Jacob, that's why, as you know, we've opposed over $110 billion of spending in this term of Parliament so far. I suspect there'll be more. And some have liked to criticise us for this, but we've said all the way along the number one issue facing Australia right now is to sustainably beat this cost of living crisis, which is bearing down on every Australian household, every Australian business. Now, measures that in different times you might consider to have merit are not measures that are appropriate when you're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and that's why we've opposed some of those measures. Those measures have included wanting to grow the size of the bureaucracy here in Canberra. Those measures have included power lines that we don't think are appropriate and necessary if we get our energy policies right. They have included billions of dollars of spending for supposed housing where we aren't seeing new houses. In fact, Labor's given up the ghost on its housing targets. I mean, they simply aren't delivering. And at the end of the day, the problem for Labor is they have the wrong tools for the times. Their answer to everything is always spin and spend, spin and spend. The right answer now is on the supply side, is get the basics right. Get back to basics, get the country back on track, and that means initiatives like ours to make sure the infrastructure bottlenecks are beaten to get more housing into the marketplace, making sure that you've got the base load, low emission, zero emissions energy that you need for this country to meet our emissions goals and ensure that Australians don't have to pay more than they have to. These supply side measures are the key. They are the way forward. Getting approvals through. I mean, Labor has had no focus on this. They've been blocking approvals for major projects in this country. If you don't get the supply side right, this is what you're left with, what we've seen today, which is an extraordinary situation, and it's not only a commentary on the failure of Labor over the last 3 years, it's a commentary on the failure of Labor over the next 3 years if they are to win government, particularly if it's a Labor Green government. Yeah, Shane.
Taylor, this is the same question I put to your counterpart. You've got budget deficits of about 117 billion forecast over the forward 3 years, not including this year. Where does that leave tax reform? Can you go to the next election promising lower income tax on working Australians?
Well, we have promised already important initiatives and reforms on the tax side, as you know, Shane. An important one that I think should never be understated is to increase and make permanent accelerated depreciation for small businesses. And this is because one of the ways through the crisis that Labor's got us in right now that they seem not focused on is to encourage business investment. And we know small businesses are the backbone of our local economies right across this country, and we need them investing, and that's why that's such an important measure. Not imposing taxes on unrealised capital gains. You've seen the Treasury just today confirm that he wants to tax unrealised capital gains. He's confirmed it. He's at it again. I mean, there's no amount of money that this Treasurer can get hold of that he doesn't. That means he doesn't want more. He just wants more every single time. Now the truth is that Labor has, as you know, spent all the money and more. That's what they've done. And so we'll look closely at these numbers and further initiatives. There's, of course, more honeypots that have been laid out today on top of what was already in the budget. That's going to be more spending from Labor, and we'll see what's in that. And from that, we'll work out what's possible as we go forward. But let me tell you how the most important thing you've got to do to deliver lower personal income taxes, Shane, because it's a good question. The most important thing you have to do is ensure that the economy grows faster than your spending. That is the key. Re-establishing those fiscal guardrails thrown out by Jim Chalmers in his first budget. Thrown out. They've been there since the Charter of Budget Honesty was put in place by Peter Costello in the 1990s. You've thrown them away, and this is what we get. And yes, when you do this, you don't leave headroom for personal income tax cuts. That's absolutely right. But of course, what we will do is re-establish those fiscal guardrails and then re-establish headroom to make sure that Australians aren't paying more tax and are able to get a fair go, to work hard, and to do well out of working hard. There was another, Michael. Yeah. Sorry, I'll get around the room.
You've been critical of Labor's off-budget spending. Jim Chalmers today says your nuclear plan would be many multiples of the off-budget spending Labor's announced. Is that correct? And if not, how much would it be?
You know, when Jim Chalmers says black, just assume white. I mean, the Orwellian spin we hear from this guy, I've never heard anything like it. I've never heard anything like it. He simply makes it up. Now, what Jim Chalmers has just brought down, as you know, is a headline cash balance over the forwards of $233 billion in 4 years. $233 billion over the forwards. I mean, seriously. I'm not going to take lectures from this guy. I'm not going to take lectures from this guy because that's, you know, what we're talking about is investments over many decades, which are amortised over many decades. It's, you know, there's order of magnitude difference, Michael, as you would know. Yeah, over here. Yeah. We'll go to, yeah.
I was just going to ask about net overseas migration.
Yep.
The figures show that there's 80,000 people higher than had been anticipated 6 months ago, but the papers make it clear it's not the arrival figures that they've got out, but departure figures. Coalition's got a policy to try and reduce net overseas migration. So do you have methods of trying to make people leave the country?
Well, you know, you've got to focus on both. As always, there's always an excuse with Labor. They'll say, oh, we've really tried on this, but we've failed because of that. I mean, seriously. And this is a Treasurer. He started off by blaming Vladimir Putin for all his woes. And then he went, Donald Trump, not so long ago, he was talking about Donald Trump's the cause of all our woes. President Xi from China is the cause of all our woes. I think it was last weekend he was on about veterans as the cause of all our woes. Now he's saying there's all this automatic stuff. Well, I tell you, what is automatic under Labor is high inflation and high immigration. That's automatic under Labor. But you can have policies in place that bring those things down. So your question is a good one, which is how. I'll come to that. It's a good question. And yes, we have been very clear about bringing those numbers down, and both arrivals and departures matter. It's very simple. It's not complicated. You know, the fact that it's taken 2.5 years for Labor to work out that net overseas migration is a function of both arrivals and departures just tells you that they haven't got a clue. I mean, seriously, if that's the new insight, heaven help us.
So how do we get those departures? So how do we get those
we're just going to
departures
keep moving.
Answer the question.
Yeah, and we'll have more to say, as Peter has said and others have said, we'll have more to say about those, the caps and so on in the lead up to the election. Well, we've been clear about the goal. That will bring those numbers down. We've been clear about some of the mechanisms, which is to bring down the number of international students. We've said that. We've been very clear about that. We've also said visa charges are part of the way we will do that. We've been clear about permanent immigration numbers and reducing those numbers, and we've been clear about getting back to where we were on humanitarian visas. So all of these things we've been very clear about. And we get these numbers after you all get them. And as we see them, we've got to work out, we see immediately how much tougher the task is than it was last time we looked at it. Because every time we get an update from this Treasurer and from this government, it's worse, it's harder, but we'll work it out. And that's because we cannot afford to have 2 million new Australians over and above organic population growth in just 2 terms when we're not getting the housing and infrastructure to support that. And you only have to look in the high growth parts of Australia, and my electorate is one of the highest of all, where you see this. I mean, we're just not keeping up. So we'll have more to say about that in the coming weeks and months.
So just to
Jack,
follow
yeah.
Mel's question, not last Sunday, the Sunday before, the opposition leader, he walked back, the commitment to 160,000, not on target, saying it's not until after the election that the coalition is going to come up with a figure for net overseas migration.
No, we haven't walked that back.
So you will get.
No, we haven't walked that back. What the government has walked back is its forecasts, which have completely failed. And we anticipated that what we'd see in the numbers today is a huge upgrade in those numbers, and we've seen exactly that, as you've just heard. And we now have to recognise, just as we do on the budget side, to Shane's earlier question, that Labor keeps putting us into a worse and worse position. They're digging a hole for us, which is deeper and deeper and deeper every single day, and we'll make appropriate adjustments to that. But we're not walking away from what we've said on the non at all. Yeah, Phil.
Mr. You spoke about getting the guardrails back in place before you bring in the headroom under tax cuts. But will you recommit to the tax GDP ratio you had in government?
23.9%.
Right, and so in that case,
we already have.
You sure? But would that come ahead of getting the fundamentals right? Or
well, you got.
Would you have to cut taxes before you might be able to get growth?
The fiscal guardrails are pretty straightforward. I learned this from watching Matthias Cormann and the way he did it. You make sure you grow the economy faster than you're spending, and if you do that, it gives you headroom to bring taxes down and to do, as Shane pointed out, to get lower personal income taxes. It's a really straightforward formula. But when your spending is growing at close to 9% nominal per year, and your economy in GDP per capita terms has been going backwards for 7 consecutive quarters, Phil, you're not going to be able to deliver benefits to Australian households. And this is the dilemma that this government is putting us in. And it's why we remain absolutely committed to those fiscal guardrails that I laid out very early on in this term of Parliament. Charles, we'll just finish up the back here and then we'll come around.
One of the big differentials between yourself and the government at the moment is on energy. Yesterday, the Deputy Premier of Queensland said, on nuclear, we didn't support it, Queenslanders didn't support it. Is he right or is Peter Dutton?
Well, we're very confident that we will get support over time from Australians to have that affordable, reliable, baseload generation, which is zero emissions, that can help bring down electricity bills. And my experience with state ministers and treasurers in the energy area, and I've had quite a lot of this experience, is over time they see the reality of the situation. Often it will take bad times for them to see the need. And we've seen this in Victoria.
So
I mean, you've seen this with Lily D'Ambrosio. I'll give you an example of this. We saw the Labor Energy Minister, she's been Labor Energy Minister down there for a long while, who absolutely refused to ever consider keeping a coal-fired generator open any longer than it absolutely has to. And now she's gone and done backroom deals with them to keep them there so she can keep the lights on and presumably try to get prices down, although not succeeding on that. I mean, we're even seeing turnarounds from Labor governments on gas, where they were dead opposed to gas and now they realise they need it. I mean, I think reason prevails in time, and this is a big step we've announced over recent months, not just last week, forward in terms of getting that debate moving and ensuring that reason does prevail in delivering Australians a lower electricity cost over the course of the coming decades.
Chair, Treasurer, just on the nuclear policy, yesterday the opposition leader said that it would bring down power prices by 44% compared to Labor's plan. Is that accurate?
Well, it will bring down electricity bills by 44%. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that's over time. That's, you know, to the extent that over time, what you see, basic economics, as long as you have good competition policy in place, and we absolutely intend to do that, that prices paid reflect underlying costs. That's what you expect to see, and that's economics 101. We've always been committed to appropriate competition policy in the energy sector, which ensures that what you pay in your bills reflects the underlying costs. In fact, we did see in the time I was Energy Minister, we went very hard on putting in place the default market offer and putting in place changes to the consumer competition legislation to make sure that we got appropriate competition outcomes in the sector. That means bills paid reflect underlying costs, and that's where we sit. Now, another question down here.
Jim Chalmers yesterday said the coalition was coming after Medicare, medicines, pension. I know Russell came out and said, this was a lie. But can you actually rule out cuts to these areas?
Well, you know, I would say look at where we've opposed Labor's big spending agenda. Where are those places? I went through them earlier, a moment ago. No, it's not underlying services to Australians. That's not where we're focused. It's actually a whole lot of initiatives that Labor's bringing in that are delivering nothing, that are unnecessary. Big spending initiatives from Labor that are not appropriate at a time like this. But I tell you what the real threat to Australians when it comes to essential services, having an economy that is not moving forward strongly, and having a budget that's being driven into the red big time, a huge turnaround in the budget into the red by the Treasurer. I mean, the way you pay for essential services, the way you pay for national security, the way you pay for health, the way you pay for disability support is to have a strong economy with high productivity levels, getting the basics right, and on the back of that positions you in a place where you can deliver to Australians. And that is what is being threatened by this Labor government. We're seeing it in the numbers, we keep seeing it, and this, my EFO, is not a plan. It's a series of slogans hashed together by this Treasurer who is simply not across the economics and frankly is more interested in politics than he ever is in the underlying economics of Australian households.
And just on the nuclear costs, so just to 100% clarify, you are saying that it will lower costs or prices for consumers by 44%? Because as you well understand, there's the generation costs, there's the distribution costs, and there's the retail costs as well.
Yeah. So the underlying costs of the system were modelled by frontier economics. And as long as we've got genuine competition policy in place, and you can certainly get that under us, and you were watching as we brought in a number of those competition measures, then prices and costs paid, bills paid by customers will reflect those underlying costs. That's how economics works. It's pretty straightforward. So there's nothing confusing about this. Now, if Jim Chalmers thinks that he's going to allow big monopolies to emerge in the energy sector who are going to take higher profit margins, he should be upfront about that, but that's certainly not our plan, and that's not what we propose. Who else hasn't had a go yet?
Can I just go back please to the question about nuclear and taking nuclear policy off budget? So you said that the Treasurer, whatever he said, when he says black, it should be white. So are you committing then to not taking nuclear off budget?
No, my point was, we see a Treasurer who has just put out a plan with $233 billion of red ink in the headline cash balance over the forwards, and he wants to lecture on expenditure to bring down the cost of energy bills, to strengthen the economy through lower energy costs. He wants to criticise that after bringing down a plan like this. Quite frankly, I'm not going to take lectures from a Treasurer who has shown such fiscal irresponsibility.
I understand that point, sorry. Are you going to take nuclear off budget, yes or no?
Well, we've always been clear about that it would be off budget. I don't think there's anything new in that. But, yeah.
Sorry.
But you know, when you say off budget, I mean the headline cash balance is a real number, and of course that's why I have included it here. We're not ignoring that.
Just going back, so you said before it will bring down power bills by 44%.
The cost of electricity to Australians in this modelling is 44% lower under our plan than Labor's.
So how much
the underlying cost, and as long as there is strong competition policy in place, and there will be under us, then that should be reflected in Australians' bills. Now, who else hasn't? No, it's pretty simple. This is Economics 101, up in the corner there. We'll give everyone a go.
Sorry, you just...
Sorry, if you think costs don't reflect bills, then I can't help you at that point. We'll go to the question in the corner.
Sorry, you said earlier you wanted to reduce the growth in the size of the bureaucracy here in Canada.
Yeah.
Where specifically would you like to reduce that?
Yeah, well, we've seen under Labor a plan which is largely delivered now to increase the number of bureaucrats by 36,000. The last numbers that had increased by 26,000, I think we're well above that now, and I'm sure it will continue to grow. Right now, look, you've got Australian households who are struggling to make ends meet. They're having to work extra hours. They've had to crack open the piggy bank and dig deep into their savings. They're having to cut back on essential spending. Now is not the time to be growing the bureaucracy. Now is not the time to be making government bigger.
So you're saying
now is the time to focus government on delivering to Australians those essential services that they want to see, and the national security we all want to see. And that means ensuring that we have a bureaucracy that is the right size to deliver that. Now, Labor will always want a bigger bureaucracy. We see Labor state governments always wanting to expand the bureaucracy. You only have to look at Victoria to see that. But you also see over time what that does to the economy. And it's a big cost all Australians have to pay. And right now is not the right time to be growing that bureaucracy.
Which departments have had the biggest growth?
Well, that's a very good question to ask Jim Chalmers, but we have seen it across many. I don't think there's any one that has been the source of all of that growth. Michael?
Just to clarify on the 44% bill reduction, is it a 44% reduction relative to current levels or relative to the counterfactual?
Relative to Labor. Relative to Labor. And that's what you've seen the plan. This is a 44% reduction relative to Labor. And that is the benchmark, that's the baseline that matters.
Just to go back to the iron ore of economics.
We'll do a couple more.
Frontier has a big assumption on a reduction in demand for electricity. My supply and demand curve show if you reduce the price of energy, of anything, demand goes up. So how does price come down and demand comes down under the...
These are long term. This is over the long term, and you know that's how you need to look at it, Shane. But at the end of the day, the reason why costs come down is because you've got a lower cost system.
Yeah, but why does demand then still come down?
Well, the difference, look, let's be clear. To the extent there's a difference in demand, it's because we think that Labor is planning to overbuild the grid. Now, we've also seen, as those of you who are energy geeks might have followed over quite a long period of time, AEMO has tended to grossly over forecast demand. That's been something that they've consistently done. They tried, I remember quite well, back in 2011, 2012 to work out why they keep getting it wrong, but they've kept getting it wrong. And so there tends to be overbuild. If there is overbuild, as you know, Shane, if there is overbuild, that has to be paid for by Australians. And that is not something we want to see. But I would also say, if you use the same demand scenarios, you're still seeing a very significant reduction in energy costs. I'll take one more. Greaves.
Just to go back to you, you said today's statement had honeypots. There are honeypots in there.
Yeah.
Please be specific.
Well, that was the $5 billion the Treasurer talked about. We're going to have a good hard look at that. And I strongly encourage you to ask him some questions about that. There's still quite a lot in the budget that we still don't know about in the contingency fund. So I would strongly encourage all of you to be asking the Treasurer lots of questions about all the hidden spending. There's lots of spending that's transparent in the budget, a hell of a lot of it. We see that in those numbers that I've just outlined. But there's a lot of hidden spending too. And of course, this is a Treasurer and government that loves to spend. And I think Australians deserve to know what they're going to spend all of that money on. So thank you very much.
Thanks. I mean, not really.
We're not on election yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet.